The sky above Earth was no longer blue. Thick, black smoke covered the heavens, blocking out the sun. The ground was cracked and lifeless, with ruins of once great cities now reduced to ash. The air smelled of burning metal and fear. A massive hologram filled the sky. The image of the alien queen, Xyra, hovered above the ruins. Her skin shimmered like dark silver, and her eyes glowed cold and bright. Her voice echoed through every speaker, every device, every mind. Humans are broken. Your spirit is gone. Your world is mine. People hid in basements and shelters, too afraid to look up. They had seen her armies march through their streets. Tall, insect-like creatures with hard black shells and glowing red eyes. These aliens, called the Xerics, crushed everything in their path. Earth's defenses had collapsed within weeks. But not everyone had given up. Daniel Kane stood on a rooftop, watching the hologram. His face was covered in dirt, his uniform torn and blood-stained. In his hand, he held a small, worn photograph, a picture of a smiling girl with curly brown hair. His daughter, Lily. He whispered, "Not broken. Not yet." The sound of heavy footsteps came from behind him. Kane turned, gripping his knife. 3 Xeric soldiers climbed onto the roof. Their black shells gleamed under the red sky, and their clawed hands twitched, ready to kill. The largest soldier hissed and spoke through its translator. "Surrender, human. Your fight is useless." Kane smiled grimly. "Let's find out." He lunged forward. His knife stabbed into the soldier's neck joint, piercing the soft flesh underneath. The alien screeched and collapsed. The second soldier swung a claw at Kane's head. He ducked, then drove his knife into its eye. The creature fell with a gurgle. The third Xerix hesitated for a moment, then leaped at him. Kane was too slow this time. The soldier's claw sliced across his chest, and he fell hard on his back. The Xerix stood over him, raising its arm for the final strike. Suddenly, the alien froze. Its eyes turned dull. It collapsed beside Kane dead. Kane sat up, confused. Behind the body stood an old woman with a makeshift stun rifle. "You fight well, soldier," she said, offering her hand. "Thanks," Kane groaned, gripping her arm and standing. "Name's Daniel Kane. Used to be a captain." "Sarah Jenkins," she said. "Come with me. We need fighters like you." They walked through narrow tunnels beneath the ruined city. The walls were damp, the air thick. Sarah led him to an old subway station where a few dozen survivors huddled. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide with fear. Kane's heart tightened. He remembered Lily's scared voice the day the invasion began. He hadn't seen her since. Sarah pointed to a table covered in maps and strange objects. In the center was a small glowing device. Ancient symbols pulsed faintly on its surface. "Found this in the mountains," Sarah said. "It's alien, but not Xeric's tech. We don't know what it does." Kane stepped closer. The artifact seemed to hum as he approached. His heart raced. He reached out and touched it. A cold shock surged through his body. His vision went white. Suddenly, Kane was standing in a vast, empty space. A deep voice spoke in his mind. "The Queen fears the light of defiance. The artifact amplifies human will, but power has a cost." The vision ended. Kane gasped and fell to his knees. The artifact glowed brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. He felt it in his mind. Energy, power, but also danger. Sarah knelt beside him. What happened? Kane clenched his fists. "We can fight her. We just need to believe. This artifact, it's the key." The next day, the Queen's voice returned, louder and colder. "Resistance is pointless. Surrender and live. Fight and you die." Kane stood in the center of the subway station, the artifact glowing in his hand. The survivors gathered around him, eyes full of doubt. "She's wrong," Kane said. His voice was steady, calm. "She wants us to think we're broken, but we're still here. We still stand. He raised the artifact. This came from an ancient race who fought her kind before. It gave me a message. The Queen fears defiance. If we stand together, if we fight with everything we have, we can push her back. A young man in the crowd muttered, "They have ships, weapons. How can we fight that?" Cain looked at the frightened faces around him and held up the photograph of Lily. "I fight for my daughter. I fight for the kids hiding in basements, hoping someone will protect them. The Queen thinks humans are weak. Let's prove her wrong." The artifact pulsed brighter, and everyone felt a sudden warmth in their hearts. Far away, on her command ship, Queen Syra's eyes snapped open. She turned to her officers. "A human has touched the ancient power. Find him. Bring me his head." The night sky above Earth no longer knew peace. High above the ruins of the city, invisible to the human eye, dark shapes drifted through the poisoned clouds. Xerix's warships circled silently, their engines humming with eerie precision. The search had begun. On board her flagship, the Neuraxis, Queen Syra stood motionless before a massive transparent window. The planet below looked small and fragile beneath her gaze. Her silver skin shimmered like liquid metal, her expression calm, but her mind burning with rage. The artifact had awakened. The human Cain had touched it, activating ancient power she thought lost forever. And now she felt it, a sharp, splintering crack in her psychic control over the planet's population. The fragile minds of humans, once so easy to bend with fear, had stirred. A dangerous thing, hope. "Commander Virex," she said softly, her voice like cold steel. A tall, insectoid figure stepped forward. His shell was polished obsidian, his eyes glowing crimson. "Yes, my queen." "Deploy the hunters," she ordered. "Find the human named Daniel Cain. Bring him to me, alive." Virex hesitated for a second. "Alive, my queen." Her eyes narrowed. "Alive. I want to see the moment his spirit breaks." The commander bowed low and left the chamber. Syra turned back to the window, her lips curling in a thin smile. Humans were stubborn, yes, but ultimately weak. She would crush this last spark of defiance, just as she had done to 1,000 worlds before. Deep beneath the earth, in the old subway tunnels, Daniel Cain stood beside the artifact, feeling its strange energy pulse in his veins. The ancient symbols along its surface glowed softly, like a sleeping heart. It whispered to him in a voice only he could hear, calm, deep, and full of knowledge. "She watches, she fears, but fear makes the enemy reckless." Cain exhaled slowly. He didn't trust the artifact completely, but he couldn't ignore its power. The day before, he had used it to calm the frightened survivors around him. He could feel their collective resolve grow stronger. But the artifact came with a price. Each time he touched its core, pain stabbed through his skull like ice. Sarah Jenkins stood beside him, loading an old plasma rifle salvaged from a fallen Xerix patrol. Her face, lined with years of hardship, was hard and focused. "That thing's dangerous, Cain," she said without looking up. "It's alien tech. Could be a trap." "Maybe," Cain admitted. He ran his thumb over the artifact's cool surface. "But it's the only edge we have." Sarah sighed. "The Queen won't sit still. She knows you have it." As if on cue, a low, vibrating hum filled the tunnel. The lights flickered. Cain's heart clenched. "They're here." The ground trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling like snow. People murmured in fear. Cain turned toward the entrance. "Get everyone to the lower tunnels," he ordered. "Now." Sarah barked commands, guiding the survivors into narrow passageways. Cain remained, gripping the artifact tightly. He felt the enemy approaching, like cold shadows pressing against his mind. The artifact reacted, growing warmer in his hand. A sharp screech split the air. Metal beams bent and twisted as a massive figure tore through the tunnel wall. It was nearly 8 feet tall, armored in segmented black plating. Its elongated head tilted slightly as it locked onto Cain. A Xerix hunter. The creature's voice rasped through a built-in translator. Daniel Kane. The Queen calls for you. Kane tightened his grip on the artifact. The hunter lunged. With instinctive speed, Kane raised the artifact. The glowing runes flared bright. A shockwave of energy burst outward, slamming into the hunter. The creature staggered, screeching in confusion. Kane felt the artifact drain his strength, but he pushed harder. The hunter's crimson eyes dimmed as the Queen's psychic hold was severed. The alien dropped to its knees, clutching its head. "Where am I?" it groaned. "You're free," Kane said, panting. He barely stood upright. "The Queen lied to you." The hunter's mandibles clicked uncertainly. Kane didn't wait to explain. He turned and sprinted down the tunnel, artifact in hand. Behind him, the hunter howled in rage. Not at Kane, but at the invisible chains it had just escaped. Kane reached the lower tunnels where Sarah and the survivors waited. "We need to move," he gasped. "Where?" Sarah asked. "They're everywhere." "The mountains," Kane said, pointing north on an old map pinned to the wall. "There's a comm station there. If we can get it working, we can call for help. Maybe some off-world colony is still out there." Sarah hesitated. "That's a long shot." Kane nodded. "It's the only shot." Above the city, Queen Syra stood once more at her window. The connection to her hunter had broken. For the first time in decades, she felt the sting of human resistance spreading like wildfire. "Interesting," she murmured. She reached out psychically across the stars, contacting her inner council. "Prepare the planetary disintegration array," she commanded. "If I cannot control them, I will destroy their entire world." Far below, Kane felt a cold shiver pass through his mind. The artifact whispered, "The Queen moves to end Earth. Time is short." Kane looked at the terrified survivors and tightened his grip on the glowing stone. "We're not broken yet." The earth groaned beneath Daniel Kane's feet as he led the group of survivors through the abandoned subway tunnels. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that twisted like ghosts. The artifact in his hand pulsed with faint warmth, guiding him toward the mountains in the distance. They moved in near silence. Men, women, and children whose faces were etched with exhaustion and fear. The air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Every sound made their hearts jump. Every distant rumble might signal the arrival of the Queen's hunters. Kane glanced over his shoulder. Sarah Jenkins was beside him, gripping her plasma rifle. Behind her, young Marcus stumbled, carrying his little sister on his back. Kane's heart clenched at the sight. The war had turned children into survivors, their innocence burned away by the relentless Xerix invasion. The artifact pulsed again. Kane stopped, raising a fist. The group froze. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. Kane closed his eyes, focusing on the whisper that scratched at the edges of his mind. The artifact's presence was growing stronger with each passing hour. Danger ahead. 3 life forms. Unseen. He opened his eyes and signaled Sarah to take cover. The group ducked behind old concrete barriers and piles of debris. Kane crouched low, gripping the artifact tightly in his left hand and a scavenged Xerix plasma pistol in his right. The silence stretched. Then came the soft click-click-click of insectoid claws on concrete. From the darkness, 3 hunters emerged, their black carapaces gleaming in the faint light. They moved with predatory grace, scanning the tunnel with glowing red eyes. The lead hunter hissed through its translator. "The Queen knows you, Daniel Kane. Surrender, and your people will live." Kane's heart pounded. The artifact throbbed, its warmth turning to searing heat. He clenched his jaw and stepped into the open. "You're lying," he said, raising the pistol. "The Queen doesn't leave survivors." The hunter tilted its head. "True, but she promised to keep your daughter alive." Kane froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. His chest tightened, and for a moment, the pistol trembled in his grasp. Lily, his daughter's name, hit him like a punch to the stomach. The hunter's mandibles clicked in amusement. She cries for you, human. The queen hears her weeping. Rage exploded in Kane's veins. The artifact burned hotter than ever. His vision blurred, and when it cleared, the hunter's psychic presence was laid bare to him. Thin, black threads connecting its mind to the distant will of Queen Tyra. Kane squeezed the artifact. The glowing runes flared with blinding light. The psychic threads snapped like brittle cords. The hunter staggered back, screeching in agony. Its eyes dimmed, confusion replacing cold certainty. "Now," Kane shouted. Sarah and the others opened fire. Plasma bolts slammed into the disoriented hunters, tearing through their armor. The creatures fell with guttural cries, twitching on the ground. The survivors moved swiftly, stripping the corpses of weapons and supplies. Kane knelt beside the lead hunter, whose eyes flickered weakly. "You were being controlled," Kane said softly. The hunter's mandibles twitched. "Free? Now?" "Yes. The queen can't reach you anymore." The alien gave a rattling sigh. "We never wanted this war. She bound us, bent our minds. Beware the core." The creature shuddered once and lay still. They moved again, pushing deeper into the tunnel network. Hours passed before they reached an old maintenance access shaft. Rusted metal stairs spiraled upward into darkness. Kane climbed first, pressing his ear to the sealed hatch at the top. No sounds of patrols. He twisted the lock and pushed. The hatch creaked open, revealing the night sky and the jagged outline of mountains against the horizon. Cold, fresh air rushed in. "Clear," Kane whispered. The group emerged from the tunnel's depths. The ruins of the city stretched behind them, while the dark, forested slopes of the mountains lay ahead. Kane pointed to a narrow path winding upward. "The comm station's near the peak," he said. "If we can power it up, we might reach one of the lunar colonies." Sarah gave a short laugh. "You think anyone's left out there?" "I have to believe it," Kane replied. His fingers brushed the photograph in his pocket, the image of Lily, smiling from a better time. The ascent was brutal. The survivors were malnourished and weak, but fear of pursuit pushed them forward. The artifact's guidance grew stronger as they climbed. Near dawn, they found the abandoned comm station nestled between jagged rocks. The dish was cracked and scorched, but the main console remained intact inside the metal shelter. Kane powered it on. The artifact's energy helped bypass the alien jamming signals. He activated the emergency beacon. "This is Captain Daniel Kane of Earth. If any human colony is receiving this, respond." Silence. Then a burst of static crackled through the speaker. Kane's pulse raced. A distorted voice came through. "Earth, we read you. Identify threat." "Xerix forces led by Queen Tyra," Kane said. "Earth's resistance is failing. We need support." More static. Then, "Hold position. Help. Inbound." The survivors cheered weakly. Kane sagged against the console, exhausted but hopeful. Miles above, in the Neuraxis, Queen Tyra stood with eyes closed, feeling the sudden burst of human hope. Her lips curled into a snarl. "Track that signal," she ordered. "Crush them before help arrives." The hunt had only just begun. The first rays of dawn crept over the jagged mountain peaks, turning the sky from crimson to pale gray. The ruined landscape below stretched for miles. Burnt forests, shattered towns, and blackened scars left by the Xerix invasion. High above, silent warships hovered like vultures, their sensors sweeping the earth for any trace of Daniel Kane and the survivors. Inside the comm station, Kane sat by the console, his head resting in his hands. The artifact lay on the metal table beside him, its glowing runes slowly fading back to a dull shimmer. He was exhausted. Every time he used the artifact's power, it drained more of his strength. The headache that followed was sharp and unforgiving. Sarah Jenkins stood nearby, reloading a salvaged Xerix plasma rifle. "No response since last night?" she asked. "Nothing," Kane said, rubbing his temples. "They said help was coming, but who knows how far they are." or if the Queen intercepted the signal. Sarah sighed, leaning against the wall. She probably did. Kane gave a bitter smile. Yeah, I'm counting on it. Beyond the shelter, the survivors huddled together for warmth. Marcus sat with his sister near a small fire, his eyes hollow. Kane walked over and knelt beside them. You did good back there, Marcus, he said gently. The boy nodded but didn't meet his gaze. Is it true? The Queen has your daughter. The question hit Kane like a punch to the gut. He squeezed his hands into fists. Maybe. We don't know for sure. But if she does, I'll get her back. The artifact stirred against his chest, hanging from a makeshift strap. The whisper returned. The core is her weakness. Without it, her power will crumble. The core. Kane had heard it mentioned before, from the dying hunter in the tunnels. The artifact was guiding him toward something dangerous. Hours later, Kane stood on a rocky outcrop, scanning the valley below with binoculars. The artifact's warmth increased as he turned eastward. In the distance, nestled in a canyon of black stone, a colossal xeric structure loomed. It was an enormous pyramid-shaped facility, its surface pulsing with faint blue light. Swarms of patrol craft circled above it like angry wasps. Sarah joined him. That's not a command center, she said, squinting through the binoculars. No, Kane agreed. It's something more important. The artifact hummed softly, confirming his suspicion. The core lies within. It's their power source, Kane said. Not just energy for ships, but psychic power. The Queen controls her armies through that core. If we destroy it, she loses control. Sarah's eyes widened. We're 30 people with stolen rifles, Kane. That place looks like a fortress. Yeah, Kane said, lips tightening. But we have this. He touched the artifact. And we don't need to fight the entire army. Just reach the core. Sarah shook her head, but didn't argue. The plan was reckless. Kane knew it. But he also knew there was no time to wait for help. The artifact's whispers had grown more urgent. The Queen was preparing something catastrophic. The survivors moved down the mountain at dusk, keeping to the shadows. They passed through the ruined forest, stepping over ash-covered bones and melted cars. As they neared the canyon's edge, the artifact pulsed stronger. Kane knelt and touched the ground. The energy here was different. He closed his eyes. The artifact's voice filled his mind. The core amplifies the Queen's mind. Destroy it, and the swarm will scatter. But beware, she has set a trap for you. Kane opened his eyes. His mouth went dry. The Queen was waiting for him. The approach to the pyramid was guarded by Xeric's patrols, tall insectoid figures moving in perfect sync. Their red eyes scanned the terrain. Kane held the artifact tightly and focused. Heat flooded his body as he projected a false psychic signature, a trick the artifact taught him. The patrols turned, sensing movement to the west, and marched away. Let's go, Kane whispered. The survivors hurried across the clearing, slipping through a crack in the pyramid's outer wall. Inside, the walls pulsed with blue veins of energy. The air crackled with static, and an oppressive weight pressed against their minds. Sarah knelt beside him. Which way? The artifact glowed brighter in response. Kane pointed down a corridor lined with sharp metallic growths. The group moved through the alien labyrinth, the walls humming like a living creature. They'd reached a vast chamber where a massive crystalline structure rose from the floor. Streams of energy flowed upward like liquid light. The artifact vibrated wildly. The core, Kane whispered. The survivors took up defensive positions while Kane approached the glowing pillar. The artifact grew hotter, its runes turning crimson. He placed it against the crystal surface. Energy surged through him, filling his mind with visions. He saw the Queen's vast network, like a spider at the center of an immense web. Through the core, she controlled the drones, the warships, the hunters, and beneath it all, trapped within a psychic cage, was a small figure with curly brown hair. Lily, Kane gasped. The girl's voice broke through the noise. "Daddy?" Kane's legs nearly collapsed. She was here, inside the core's network, imprisoned like a living battery. "You came for me," Lily whispered. "Always, sweetheart," Kane choked out. The warmth turned cold. The air shifted. Behind him, a sharp clicking echoed through the chamber. Sarah's voice rose in panic. "Kane, we've got company." He turned. The queen stood in the entryway, flanked by towering hunters. Her silver skin glowed in the blue light, and her eyes fixed on Kane. "Ah," she said softly, voice smooth as silk. "The stubborn human. And now you see, Kane, your daughter is mine. Her mind fuels my armies. If you destroy the core, you destroy her." Kane's hands trembled. The artifact blazed like a torch, its power resonating with the core. Lily's voice was faint but clear. "Don't stop, Daddy. I'm not afraid." The queen's lips curled in a cold smile. "You can't win. Sacrifice your daughter, or kneel before me." Kane's heart shattered. His mind screamed with the impossible choice. The artifact crackled with energy. Sarah shouted, "Kane, whatever you're gonna do it now." Tears blurred his vision. He pressed the artifact harder against the core. His daughter's voice whispered one last time, "I love you, Daddy. Do it." Kane roared as he poured every ounce of willpower into the artifact. Energy surged into the core. The crystal fractured with a high-pitched shriek. The queen screamed as her psychic link shattered. The core exploded in a blinding wave of light. Kane felt himself pulled into darkness. The world was nothing but darkness and cold. Daniel Kane floated in a vast, empty void. He couldn't feel his body, only the weight of his choice pressing down on him like iron chains. The explosion of the core was burned into his mind, the shattering crystal, the queen's scream, and Lily's final whisper, "I love you, Daddy. Do it." Pain, sharp and relentless, crashed over him like waves. He tried to move, but his limbs didn't respond. Then, through the darkness, came a voice, soft and familiar. "Daddy, wake up." "Lily." The void trembled. Kane's heart surged with desperate hope. He forced himself toward the sound, dragging his mind through the darkness. The voice grew louder, clearer. "Don't give up, Daddy. I'm waiting for you." With a sudden jolt, Kane opened his eyes. Blinding white light stabbed into his vision. He tried to sit up but couldn't. His wrists and ankles were strapped to a cold, metallic surface. The air smelled of burning ozone and something acidic. "Ah, he wakes." The voice was cold, familiar, and full of contempt. Kane turned his head toward the sound. The alien queen, Zyra, stood before him. Her silver skin shimmered, and her eyes glowed with pale fire. "You surprised me, Kane," she said, circling the table like a predator. "I did not think a human could break the core." Kane's throat was dry. He swallowed hard. "Where's Lily?" The queen smiled, her thin lips curving upward. "She lives." Relief and fear warred within him. "I want to see her." "You will," Zyra said softly, "after we finish here." The metal table tilted upright, lifting Kane into a standing position. Across the chamber, a massive viewport revealed Earth below, scarred and broken, wrapped in dark clouds. Hovering warships unleashed plasma bombardments on the last remaining cities. "Why destroy the planet if you already control it?" Kane asked through gritted teeth. "Because you gave them hope," the queen hissed. Her eyes flared with anger. "Your defiance spread like a disease. After the core's destruction, my psychic control weakened. My armies falter. My fleet hesitates." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "But hope is fragile, Kane. I will crush it completely, starting with you." Kane met her gaze. "You're afraid." Her expression hardened. With a flick of her wrist, she gestured to a side wall. It lit up to reveal a transparent containment field. Inside was a small girl with curly brown hair. "Lily." Kane's breath caught in his chest. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, staring through the field. When she saw him, her eyes brightened. "Daddy." "Lily." Kane fought against his restraints, but they didn't budge. The artifact was gone. Without it, he was powerless. The Queen watched the reunion with amusement. "I kept her alive because she is special. Her psychic potential is extraordinary. She helped power my core. Even now, I feel her mind resisting me." Kane's eyes didn't believe Lily. "You'll never break her." "Perhaps, but I can break you." Zoira raised one hand. Kane felt an invisible force clamp around his skull. Pain, sharp and relentless, stabbed into his mind. Images flooded his vision. Cities burning, humans cowering, his daughter screaming. The pain deepened until every nerve in his body felt like it was on fire. "Bow," the Queen commanded. Kane's legs trembled. His knees bent slightly, but he bit his tongue, using the sharp pain to anchor himself. "No," he growled. The pressure increased. Blood trickled from his nose and ears. His vision blurred. "Bend," Zyra said, her voice a cold whisper. Kane clenched his fists and stared into her eyes. "Go to hell." Zyra's expression shifted from amusement to genuine rage. She released the psychic grip, and Kane sagged against the restraints, panting. "Very well," she said. "I hoped you would break willingly. Now I'll use your daughter." She turned to the containment field. Lily scrambled to her feet, eyes wide with fear. "No," Kane shouted, struggling against the restraints. The Queen raised her hand toward the girl. Lily whimpered, clutching her head. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed. "Stop it," Kane roared. "She's just a kid." The Queen didn't respond. The glow in her eyes intensified. Lily screamed, the sound sharp and piercing. Kane's mind shattered with helpless rage. He felt the void again, the terrible emptiness of despair. His daughter was dying, and he could do nothing. "We are not broken, Daddy." The whisper wasn't from Lily. It was the artifact's voice. Soft, distant. Kane's pulse quickened. He focused, searching for the faint connection. In the depths of his mind, a spark of warmth flickered. The artifact. It wasn't gone. It had merged with him. He closed his eyes, ignoring the pain, and reached for the spark. The warmth grew. The artifact's runes appeared on his skin, glowing faintly beneath the surface. The Queen fears defiance. Kane opened his eyes. The restraints cracked and shattered. He fell to the ground but caught himself. Energy crackled around his hands. The Queen turned in shock. "Impossible," she whispered. Kane raised his arm and unleashed a psychic blast. The energy slammed into her, throwing her across the chamber. She crashed against the wall with a metallic shriek. He sprinted to the containment field. The artifact's glow in his palm pulsed against the force field. With a surge of will, he shattered the barrier. Lily lay limp on the floor. Kane scooped her into his arms. "Lily, sweetheart, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open. "Daddy, I knew you'd come." Tears blurred Kane's vision. Always, baby girl. Always. Behind them, Tyra rose to her feet, eyes blazing with hatred. Her body crackled with dark energy. "You cannot win, Kane," she screamed. "The fleet obeys me still. Earth will burn." Kane cradled Lily with one arm. The artifact's glow intensified as he tapped into its deepest reserves. He turned to face the Queen. "We're not broken," Kane said softly. "And we're not done." The artifact's power surged, crackling like lightning around him. The Queen howled as Kane charged forward. The final battle had begun. The command chamber shook with crackling energy. Blue-white lightning arced from Kane's outstretched hand, slamming into Queen Zyra and hurling her across the metallic floor. The artifact's power roared through him like a wild storm, vast, unrelenting, and burning hot beneath his skin. In his arms, Lily clung tightly to his neck. Her small, trembling fingers pressed against his shoulder as she whispered, "Daddy, she's still here." Kane's eyes locked onto the queen. Zyra rose slowly from the ground, her silver skin cracked like shattered glass, revealing pulsing black veins underneath. Her lips curled into a snarl as she spread her arms wide. The air around her darkened. The shadows themselves twisted into tendrils, coiling like snakes. The artifact in Kane's chest pulsed a warning. "Beware, she draws from the void. Her power will grow unchecked if not stopped." Kane's jaw tightened. The queen was no longer bound by the core. She was tapping into something far older, far darker. He set Lily down gently. "Stay behind me, sweetheart," he whispered. Lily's eyes were wide but determined. "I will." The queen's laughter filled the chamber, sharp and cold. "You don't understand, Kane. I was forged in war long before your species learned to speak. I don't need the core. I am the core now." Black tendrils lashed out toward Kane. He raised his hand, and the artifact's light surged forward. The energy beams collided, crackling in midair. Kane's muscles strained as the force of her attack pushed him backward. His boots skidded against the floor. The queen's voice was like shards of ice. "You cannot win, human. Sacrifice the girl, give me the artifact, and I will let your people survive." "Never." Kane spat through gritted teeth. The artifact pulsed harder, and he poured everything he had into the beam. The tendrils snapped and dissolved. The queen staggered but quickly recovered. Her eyes narrowed. "So be it." The walls trembled. The ceiling cracked. Outside the viewport, Earth seemed to pulse as massive warships shifted into position. Zyra raised both hands. "Initiate planetary disintegration sequence," she commanded. Kane's heart dropped. The sky outside glowed red as the ships locked their weapons on Earth's surface. His earpiece crackled to life. "Captain Kane." Sarah's voice came through, urgent and breathless. "They've started charging some kind of weapon in orbit. It's massive. They're going to destroy Earth," Kane said, glancing at Lily. "Sarah, can you disable it?" "Negative. Their defenses are too strong. We're pinned down at the mountain base." Kane's mind raced. The artifact hummed against his chest. A single word etched itself into his thoughts. "Bridge." He turned toward the chamber's main control panel. If he could overload the bridge's power core, he might disrupt the entire fleet's targeting systems. But that meant leaving Lily exposed. He knelt beside her. "Lily, listen to me. I have to get to that control panel. I need you to stay here and stay low. Can you do that?" Her eyes shone with tears, but she nodded. "Okay, Daddy." Kane squeezed her hand and stood. The queen launched another psychic blast. Kane raised a shimmering shield with the artifact's energy and sprinted toward the control panel. The tendrils slammed into his barrier like battering rams. Each hit sent agony through his skull. He reached the console, placed his palm on the interface, and closed his eyes. "Interface override," the artifact whispered, "connecting to fleet systems." Kane visualized the network, thousands of ships linked to the Queen's consciousness. The artifact guided him to the central targeting grid. The Queen realized what he was doing. Her voice cracked with fury. "No." Black tendrils slammed into Kane's back, sending him sprawling. Pain exploded through his body. The artifact's glow dimmed. He tried to stand but collapsed to his knees. Blood trickled from his nose and ears. Zyra loomed over him. "Foolish human," she hissed. "You had the power to save your daughter, your world. Instead, you chose death." Kane coughed and lifted his head. "You don't understand us," he gasped. The Queen raised her arm for the final blow. Then, from behind, a small voice shouted, "Leave my daddy alone." Lily stood with the artifact in her hands. It glowed so brightly that the entire chamber bathed in white light. Her small body trembled with the effort. Zyra turned, eyes wide. "Impossible. The artifact's energy swirled around Lily. The runes carved themselves into her skin, glowing like living tattoos. Her eyes blazed with the same ethereal light. "You're scared," Lily said, voice amplified with the artifact's power. "You act strong, but you're scared of us." The queen roared and hurled a wave of psychic force at the girl. Lily stood firm. The artifact absorbed the attack and reflected it back. The blast struck the queen, shattering the floor beneath her feet. Kane, fueled by adrenaline, staggered to the console. The targeting grid hovered before his eyes. He focused all his remaining energy into the command override. Fleet targeting disrupted. Critical overload in 30 seconds. The queen rose again, battered but unbroken. Her eyes burned with hatred. "I will tear this planet apart." Lily held the artifact high. "Not today." The artifact unleashed a surge of white fire. The queen screamed as the energy engulfed her, searing through her psychic defenses. Her silver skin melted away, revealing brittle black exoskeleton beneath. The command center shook violently. Kane grabbed Lily and sprinted toward the exit. The queen's twisted screams echoed behind them. They reached the corridor just as the chamber exploded. The blast hurled them forward, but Kane shielded Lily with his body. In space, the Xerix warships faltered. The command signals from the queen vanished. Their targeting arrays overloaded, causing catastrophic power failures. The Earth, though scared, was safe. Hours later, Kane woke to the sound of crackling static on a nearby communicator. Lily lay beside him, clutching the artifact, now dark and cold. The communicator crackled again. "This is Commander Reyes of the Lunar Defense Fleet. We've received your distress call. Earth, we are inbound. Hold fast." Kane smiled weakly. "We held, Commander. We held." Lily stirred, opening her eyes. "Did we win, Daddy?" Kane kissed her forehead. "Yeah, baby girl. We won." Far above the planet, the remnants of the Queen's flagship drifted in silence. But deep within the wreckage, a faint, cold whisper stirred. "This isn't over, Kane. I will return." The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and burned ozone. Smoke coiled through the ruined command center, and shattered walls groaned as the structure settled into stillness. Outside, Earth's sky slowly brightened as the alien warships drifted powerless, their control systems broken with the destruction of the core. Daniel Kane sat against a fractured console, cradling Lily in his arms. His body was battered, his skin streaked with soot and blood. The artifact had gone cold in his daughter's small hands, its runes dull and lifeless. The immense power that once coursed through Kane had vanished, leaving behind an emptiness that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The communicator crackled again. "Earth Command to Ground Team. We're seeing the alien fleet collapsing. What's your status?" "Over." Kane pressed the button with trembling fingers. "This is Kane. The Queen's command network is down. The fleet's in disarray." He coughed, pain stabbing through his ribs. "Earth is still here." Cheers erupted through the crackling line. Kane managed a weary smile. "Daddy." Lily's voice was small and tired. She shifted against his chest and opened her eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "You okay?" "My head hurts," she said, rubbing her temples. "And I feel empty." "The artifact drained a lot out of us," Kane said. "But you were amazing, Lily. You saved us." She gave a weak smile. "We saved us." Kane kissed her forehead. "Yeah, we did." An hour later, Sarah Jenkins and the remaining survivors arrived. Her hair was singed, and she had a deep cut on her forehead, but her eyes lit up when she saw Kane and Lily alive. "You did it," she said, dropping beside them. "Not alone," Kane said. "Lily was the real hero." Sarah ruffled the girl's hair. "Looks like it runs in the family." Kane shifted, wincing. "Report." Sarah exhaled. "The Queen's fleet is falling apart. Without her psychic control, the drones are lost. Half of them just crashed. The others are wandering aimlessly. Resistance cells around the world are taking advantage. The lunar fleet just arrived in orbit and is mopping up what's left. And the Queen. Sarah's expression darkened. No sign of her body. She might have been vaporized when the core exploded. Kane's jaw clenched. She's still out there. I can feel it. Sarah nodded grimly. We'll stay alert. The survivors climbed out of the wreckage into the pale light of morning. The sky, once choked with ash, was now streaked with fragile lines of blue. The alien warships hung motionless like broken toys, sparks of fire marking where they fell from grace. Kane held Lily's hand as they walked across the scared landscape. The artifact, now dull and cracked, dangled from a strap around his neck. "Daddy," Lily asked. "Yeah, baby. Is it really over?" Kane knelt beside her and squeezed her hands. "The war? It's ending. The Queen lost, but she's not gone. One day, she might come back. Will we fight her again?" Kane smiled softly. "If she comes back, we'll be ready." Lily gave a determined nod, her young eyes reflecting a strength beyond her years. 3 days later, Kane stood on a temporary stage in the center of New London, one of the few remaining cities. Around him, thousands of survivors gathered. They were thin, injured, and weary, but their eyes held a new light. Hope. The Earth Resistance Council had asked Kane to speak. He didn't want the spotlight, but Sarah convinced him. "People need a face to rally around," she'd said. "And you've earned it." The microphone crackled as he stepped up. The crowd fell silent. Kane took a deep breath. Lily stood beside him, holding his hand. 6 months ago, he began, Earth was invaded. We were told we were weak. That humanity was broken. That no one would stand against the Queen's armies. He looked out at the crowd. But we stood. We fought. We survived. Not because of technology or weapons, but because we refused to break. The crowd murmured agreement. "We lost so much," Kane continued, his voice tightening. "Friends, family, entire cities. But we never lost what makes us human, our spirit, our stubborn, relentless defiance." He squeezed Lily's hand and raised the artifact high. It no longer glowed, but the symbol of their victory was unmistakable. The Queen thought fear would win. She was wrong. We are here. We are unbroken. And if she ever comes back, she'll find us stronger than ever. The crowd roared. People raised their fists, cheering with raw emotion. The sound echoed across the ruined streets. As the noise subsided, Kane knelt beside Lily and whispered, "How'd I do?" She smiled. "You were awesome, Daddy." That night, Kane stood on a rooftop, looking at the stars. Lily was asleep downstairs with the other children. Sarah joined him, handing him a mug of something hot. "Thinking about her?" she asked. "Yeah," Kane said. "Zyra's out there. I can feel it." Sarah nodded. "What do we do?" Kane looked at the artifact, now resting on the table beside him. It was cracked, but faint warmth still radiated from it. "We rebuild. We train, and we prepare." He pointed to the stars. "She's out there somewhere, watching, waiting. But next time, she won't find Earth unprepared." Sarah grinned. "The Unbroken live on." "Yeah," Kane said softly. "We're just getting started." Epilogue. Deep in the cold void beyond Pluto, a shadow drifted silently through space. The wreckage of Zyra's flagship, thought destroyed, pulsed faintly with dark energy. Within the shattered command chamber, a single metallic cocoon pulsed. The cocoon cracked open. Silver liquid poured onto the floor, reshaping into a tall, slender figure. Zyra opened her eyes. Her skin was darker now, her eyes a deep crimson. She extended her senses and felt the flickering psychic traces of Earth far across the system. Her lips curled into a smile. "Enjoy your victory, Kane. It won't last." The void swallowed her laughter.